So diving right into smart form details. And the information that I'm presenting is not new. It's kind of pulled from different webinars that we put last year. It's just in more concise format. So just overview and some important items. But this information was co-presented with NASCAS last year at one of the webinars. So if you were to go back to webinars and you see this information, please don't be mad because you'll say, oh, it's the same information. Again, it was pulled from different sources. But the general information about smart forms, it gets pre-populated with eligible entity name. So when you receive a smart form, you open it, you have eligible entity name, your agency name, UEI, and previous year data. The UEI component is very important because that allows when you return the smart form back to your lead agency, they convert it to XML and upload it. UEI is what allows that data to get into our online data collection system and then being aggregated. So if you see that UEI is wrong or something's going on, please let Ben know so he can work with us so we can update that. It's not a big deal. We can always update it. We can always update it manually, but just to reiterate the fact that it's an important component. And then previous year data, it just, when you it allows you to compare and to see what the numbers you put last year. Sometimes, it's just for ease of it. So you don't have to open last year's data, last year's smart forms. It's right there for you. So you kind of can see and compare what you're entering today versus last year. And the way how it works in general. So federal office sends lead agency or states their smart forms for their agencies, then the state sends it down to the agencies, and then it kind of works their way back up. Then state exports module 2 and module 4 to an XML file to upload into online data collection system or OLDC. And then also there is module 3 that I'm not going to be talking today. It's optional, very encouraged, and I know that North Dakota submitted a couple of module 3 submissions, but it's a different a little different process when it comes to uploading into online data collection system. It's not exported to XML. And I know that export to XML might sound a little scary, but I'll go over it. Some standard functions that module 2 and module 4 smart forms have. So they have, if you look at a smart form at the bottom, you have the tabs. The first one is instruction tab. It gives you some instructions on how to, fill out the smart form, how to ensure that it's working. Then errors and warnings tab, which is important. I will demonstrate it, and there are some components that are essential to the smart form. Again, previous year data and macros. So what is macros? Macros essentially is the coding behind the Excel sheet that allows the smart form be a smart form, right? It's not just an Excel sheet. It has so many validations that are built in, and they are built as form of macros. So that's why it's very important to make sure that macros are activated to see so the smart form is functioning correctly. So you have all the validations popping up to aid your completion of the smart form and data entry. So jumping right into completing the smart forms, right? So I've given a little bit of an overview. You probably have some questions. Some of you probably already know this information and done it for several years, probably even more than several years. So I apologize if that information is not new. But I'm glad that it's not changing from year to year, right? So we kind of learn one way and then we just stick with it and perfect it. So when you open a smart form, the question is, how do I know that the smart form is working as it's supposed to? Well, there are certain ways how to ensure it. So the first thing that you do, you open the smart form, and there's several windows that can pop up. Not windows, rather the messages. So this is one of them. You can see on the screen this big red message that says blocked content. That essentially says that macros in this document is blocked. So if you see this message, you must unblock macros. So the next question, how do I do that? And I'll show you right on the next slide. So once you see this message, there's nothing really you can do. Your form is not functioning correctly, or it's not yet functioning correctly, right? You're going to enter data, you're not going to see any validation, so it's just not a good use of your time. So to unblock macros, close your form and pull up the folder in which your form lives. So you can see on my screen, I have it in Documents. And by the way, the information that I'm presenting today, it's no agency in particular. You can see that it's says XYZ agency, so don't be concerned. It's no one's smart form. So once you pull it up, pull the folder up where the smart form lives, right-click on the form, and you'll see the window popping up. And depending on what Microsoft version you have, you'll have properties. I know that on my personal laptop, I have a different version, so it looks a bit different. On my work laptop, I have it like this. So, but anyhow, you'll have properties as an option. So once you click properties, so click it, and then once you click properties, you'll have a new screen popping up where you can unblock macros. So you can see that at the bottom of that screen, you have this little check mark, and I highlighted it red on the screen. You just click unblock and it kind of checks it, and then you click OK. One little note that if you look at this pop-up screen, you have several kind of tabs at the top. So you have general, security, details, and previous versions. So by default, it opens as general in the tab general. So you should see unblock right away. But let's say you didn't notice it right away, and then you clicked on security, and then you don't see it again. So make sure that you're in general. So once you click OK, that unblocks macros. So some of the final tips, you may only see the security risk message if you have the newest version of Excel. If you have previous version of Excel, you might not see it, and the unblock option might not be there. So you don't need to do those steps. But then the question is, well, if you said that that's how we ensure that SmartForm is working, and I don't have those messages and I don't have unblock, how do I unblock it? So in this case, when you open the smart form, you'll have, when you open it, enable content message. It's going to be similar. It's not going to be red. It's going to be yellow, and I'm going to show you on the next screen. So once you enable the content, it's going to be working. So if you don't have the security risk message, like that red message that macros are disabled popping up right away, the form, you don't need to go an extra step to unblock macros. So you'll have to have the, when you open it, you'll have enable content. And another step to ensure that your smart form is working correctly is to make sure that you have export to XML button. And if you don't have it, that's how you know the smart form is, we say corrupt or broken. So it's not functioning correctly. You're going to enter data, you're going to send it to the state office, and then they won't be able to export it to XML. So you can, minimize the time going back and forth by just when you open it, even before you enter the data, to see that you have that button. And I will say this, it's not a big deal. We have all the smart forms. We can send Ben the clean smart form, so it's never a problem. I am usually very, very responsive. I try to address all the issues right away. I hope, Ben, if you can confirm that. I think I'm pretty responsive, so that's never a problem, but just to save your time, because you've already entered all this data, and then all of a sudden there's no export to XML button. So again, if you don't see it, you will contact your lead agency, state lead agency, and then you know that if there are issues, you can always email me. But this is what I'm talking about. So again, you open the smart form and there are no red warnings. Okay, that means that you don't need to unblock macros. Everything's good. You just have to click on enable content and enable editing. Sometimes enable editing pops up, sometimes it doesn't, but enable content pops up usually all the time. So once you click that, it'll be fine. And you can see here that it also says security warning, macros have been disabled. So once you click enable content, that enables them. And this is the XML export button, right? So you have the smart form, and at the bottom you have different tabs. In this case, it's module 2. So instructions is the first tab, and outstanding errors and warnings is the second tab. And that's where XML export button lives. So you can see it on the top left. I highlighted it again. I would say always check once you do all the steps to, ensure that your smart form is ready to be, if you're ready to enter the data, just always check that it's there, because again, there's nothing worse than doing all this work, spending all this time, and then having to do it all over again. So I'll pause here to have, if you have, to see if you have any questions, but I will stop sharing my screen and I'll reshare it to show you that in kind of live, so we can, again, it's great to see it on the PowerPoint, but I just want to make sure that I'm able to replicate that, because that's what I'm asking of you as well. Okay, I hear no questions, so I'm going to start the live demo. It's very quick.
Excuse
Oh,
me.
yeah.
One question. Is this PowerPoint going to be available for us?
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
didn't, yeah, of course, I wasn't able to send it to Ben prior, but we just need to make sure that it's 508 compliant. So, so we are adhering to all regulations. But once we square that away, which is going to be very fast, I'm going to send it to Ben so he can send it over. Thank you so much for this question. I think that is, I would love to have the PowerPoint as well if I were listening. Yeah, so I'm going to share the screen. Okay. So I want to focus on those two smart forms, and other items in this folder I'm going to briefly talk later. But you can see that similar convention, that naming convention that I had on the slide. Right now we just have extra module 4 here, but let's test it. So I have it saved. Ben sent it to me. I saved it on my laptop in the documents folder under fiscal year 2023 smart forms, which is last year. So I should have called it fiscal 24. But so let's click on the smart form. Okay, here we go. And I'm opening the smart form for module 2. I just want to let you know that module 2 and module 4 macros and that kind of stuff is identical, so it doesn't really matter. So let me make sure that I am okay. So here we go. We have our bright red warning popping up right away. So that's how we know we don't even need to do anything else. When I see that, I close it right away. Okay, it's not worth trying to figure out anything else. Not worth trying to enter data, because I know it's not, nothing's good gonna come out of it. So I close it right away. I don't save it because I haven't entered any data. So I do a right click on the form and I have properties right here. Once I click properties, I have my screen here, and you can see those tabs that I was talking about. They're clickable, but by default it opens general, so we're in general. And at the bottom I have this unblock option. So I click unblock and you can see there is a check mark now, and I click OK. So now let's check. It should be working. Here we go. So now we don't have the red warning, security warning. Now we just have this yellow message that says enable content. So I believe that once you unblock macros once, this is all you have to do. Like, you unblocked it once, now every time you go to update your data, you will have this security message popping up rather than the big red one. So this is what I'm talking about. You can click enable content, and here we are. So when you open the smart form, it opens it automatically in the outstanding errors and warnings tab, which is very convenient, because the first thing that we do before we even click on any A, B, C sections, we see if there's an export to XML button, right? And it's here visually. I like to also click on it just to see if I'm going to have something. Like if the window is going to pop up. So in this case, it does. You don't have to do it because the state office does it. But just for my peace of mind, I always like to click it just to see if it's actually working or it's not just an image. But if it's there, it's there. So I'm not going to save it. So I'm going to close out, and I know that my smart form is working correctly. So I can go ahead now and enter data in section A, B, and C of module 2 smart form. Let me know if you want me to do the module 4 unblocking macros as well, if you want me to do another demo, or if it was if you're ready to move forward, I can always do that. I hear nothing, so I will move on. I'll stop sharing, reshare my PowerPoint, and I do apologize. We have a little bit of jumping back and forth. So we are done with the smartphone demo, so we're jumping back to module 2, module 4, connecting the dots. And I know that that's kind of a complicated piece of the annual report, right? We have module 2, that is more of a fiscal component, right? And we have module 4, that is more outcome services characteristics, right? It's a bit of more client services. So I can see how there can be a little bit of a disconnect there. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We can talk about it all day, and you only give me the mic. I'll be there for 4 hours. Ben will not know how to get rid of me, but I just want to make sure that we cover the basics. So in the future, if you have any more questions, you can make sure to ask Ben, and I'll be able to answer them, or you'll kind of get the gist of how it works, and it'll just make sense step by step. Okay, so we have module 2, that is right now called Expenditures, Capacity, and Resources. So essentially, that's how that's a count of allocation of resources. So funds, human capacity, time spent volunteering, right? So that's all our resources. That's how we allocated them. That's what we report in module 2 in sections A, B, and C. So then we jump into module 4, section B, which is individual and family services. And that's how resources are mobilized. So we have the services there. So we've allocated the resources, and now we're providing the services. So there is this connection. Then we jump to module 4, section A, individual and family national performance indicators, or abbreviated as FNPIs. So we've allocated resources, we've mobilized those resources or provided the services, and now in section A, we have participant outcomes. So we have our individuals who've achieved certain outcomes because of the services that were provided with the resources that were allocated. So kind of working up and down. And then in module 4, section C, it's all characteristics report. It's participant demographics. So I know that intake process is different for different agencies, depending on what you do. So it's not over prescriptive. And I know state has more say in that. So I'm not going to talk a ton about it. But again, that's just participant demographics. So the age, gender, income, and stuff like that. So now I want to talk about a couple of scenarios, right, where that disconnect can happen. And that will move us right into the review memo, right? Because review memo is very technical. I like to, when I started this job, I wanted to sit down and understand how does it work? Module 2, module 4, how is it connected in very simple terms? So it took me a second, but here we are. So let's say scenario number 1, we have module 2, agency is reporting Head Start. And I did put the technical numbering convention here. That's what it is in the annual report, but I just want to keep it more simple, right? The agency is reporting Head Start, and they're reporting 1.5 million. Okay, that's allocation of resources. Then when we move to section B, service 2B, that is Head Start, the agency is not reporting any individuals there, right? So that is already a bit of a question because, well, the agency reported that there were services or there were resources allocated, but there are no services. And once we move to Module 4, Section A, so the outcomes, FNPI 2A and FNPI 2B, those are outcomes specific to children 0 to 5. So those are Head Start kiddos, right? And we can see that they're both 0. So that means that there were no, seems like there were no participants or no kiddos who were working towards certain outcomes. There were no outcomes achieved. So that is a bit of a disconnect, right? When this situation happens, this is where the warning on the review memo is going to appear. And the warning will have a very standardized language saying, you've said that you have expenditures, but there are no services. You've said you have expenditures, but there are no outcomes, right? So this is what it essentially means. It is, can that happen? In this scenario, there could be an explanation why there is, right? That's why it's a warning. It's more so for you to look at it and confirm that that's the case. But when we look at the data, we want to look at the whole picture, right? And in this picture, something's missing. And again, there could be an explanation why something's missing, right? It's not necessarily, oh, you've done something wrong. No, absolutely not. It's more so, hey, is there something going on there? Are you missing something? And I do want to say that annual report, there are a lot of tabs. You could have easily missed something, put the wrong key because, I don't know, maybe I was trying to put 1 or 4, but I accidentally clicked 0, right? Because on the keyboard, they're right above each other. So that can always happen. So that's why when you receive your review memo, that's going to be a warning. That scenario, that's going to produce a warning. And in other words, if one of the components is missing, right? We have expenditures, we have services, we have outcomes. When one of the components is missing, it's going to be a warning because it's like, hey, there's something's going on here. And another component to it that, let's say, once we move to Section C, all characteristics report, we have age-specific 0 to 5, we have 597 kiddos. Numbers are completely made up. Just want to warn you as well. 597 kiddos reported. So, right, we do have demographics of participants. Seems like there were 597 kids served by the agency, but where those kids, they could have been served in other programs. It doesn't have to be Head Start. But most likely, if you do have Head Start money, most likely those kiddos are also going to be receiving Head Start services. So just always want you to look a little bit closer at the numbers that are reported. I'll stop for a second before I move to the second scenario. See if there are any questions.
Lena, can I add something really quick?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So Module 2 and Module 4 smart forms do not talk to each other. So this is very important because some of the validations and warnings we'll be talking about, both Elena and I, will be populated on that tab, the warnings and errors tab, and the smart form. What she's talking about here is something you're going to have to do independently. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, this is Denise, and I think using the Head Start numbers is a really good example. It's really clear too as to the fact that you're talking about the amount that was expended, but then those specific examples of services and outcomes that are not indicating anything. But then again, looking at the demographics report and the agency is reporting that they had almost 600 kids, of which a subset could be the Head Start kids, but the data was missing from modules 4A and 4B.
Yeah, and there always could be the case that is true. Those numbers are correct, but there could be also that, maybe the numbers are wrong. And that's, we always want you to think of like the components that could be missing. And that's how I see the annual report. And it took me a second to kind of wrap my head around it. But also thank you, Tiffany, so much for bringing that up. Yes. Modules in Module 4 smart forms are completely separate. That's why sometimes there's certain warnings that you will be able to see, and I'll show you later when I open the smart form. But there are certain warnings and errors that you will only see on the review memo, right? So you might be a little mad because it's like, well, if we saw it right away, we could have fixed it. But again, because they don't really speak to each other, that is independent work. So thank you so much, Tiffany, for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. Okay, I'll move to the second scenario. And the setup is kind of the same, just changing the items. Right, so we have module 2, employment expenditures, $20,000. But no employment services and no employment FNPIs. So that is a very similar scenario, right? Before we had the Head Start, obviously Head Start money comes from different agency. But in this case, the agency is reporting that they've allocated $20,000 of CSBG money to employment, but there are now absolutely no employment services and no employment FNPIs, right? So in this case, that is a bit raises a question, right? So you've said that you've spent money, but you're not accounting for services and FNPIs, right? Again, there could be the reason, and that's why we have the review memo, because you can always comment on the review memo why that's the case. But again, could have just missed it, or accidentally put 0, or maybe you wanted to put this under A to B, which is education and not employment, right? Could that happen? Of course. So that's just a very similar scenario where you report one component, but 2 others are missing. Pause for a second before I move to the third and final one. Okay, here now. So scenario number 3, this is a bit like a tricky one. I do like to give an example of it, and I believe Ben and I talked about it, so bear with me. I'll try to do it a bit slower, because even when I was doing my dry run presenting, I kind of got caught up in it, and I was like, oh, what am I trying to give here? What is my takeaway? So we have expenditures, employment, in employment, and in housing domain, right? Employment is 0, so agency did not report any employment expenditures, but agency reported expenditures in the housing domain. Okay. And we move to services, and we can see that there are no employment services reported, but reported some of the housing services. Doesn't really matter in this case which ones. Just we know that they were reported, right? So far, it makes sense. No employment expenditures, no employment services. Housing expenditures, housing services. So far, so good. Once we move to section A, outcomes, I can see that FNPI 1B, which is employment, individual who obtained employment up to a living wage, there is a number. And there is also an outcome in the housing domain, right? Which makes sense because we've reported expenditures, we've reported services, we've reported outcomes, right? So now the question is, where is this 45 individuals coming from? Should have switched numbers, a bit illogical here, but let's not get up on numbers. There is a reporting. So I like to give this example because, right, an argument can be made, and that's what was made in the first 2 scenarios, that the component is missing, right? We're reporting outcomes, but it seems like there were no services provided in employment and no employment expenditures, right? I like to give this example because I call it a spillover effect. It's not an official term, it's a Lena term, so don't quote it, please. Or if you quote it, do not put my name next to it. Sometimes when I think of CSBG services or outcomes or how the agency operates, right? And in general, how people's life is, right? The person's coming and they're struggling with obtaining safe housing, right? They may be homeless. And they obtained housing, right? And that gives them so much more, right? That gives them, they don't have to worry that they don't have a shelter, right? Now they can focus on other aspects of their life. So let's say the person didn't have didn't have a job. They might not have worked towards employment, any employment outcomes. They might have not participated in any employment services. The agency might not have even, provided any employment services, didn't even allocate any funds. But because the person obtained safe and affordable housing, they were able to get a job, right? That's why it can always happen. So at first glance, yes, we do have the components missing, but could there be a reason? Yes. In this case, again, I should have switched, put 45 under housing and 30 under employment, because it would be a bit more logical. But this is just to not confuse you, but to just reiterate the point that there always could be an explanation on why certain data points appear as they are. And it's important for your state office to know. It's important for us to know, because we do look at the data. But it's also just important for you to understand, or to know how those components speak to each other, and because data shows a lot, right? Data shows how your agency is operating. And I'm sure that you have a lot more to do than just to look at data. But at the end of the year, you can just look at the data and see if something's missing. And if something's missing, there's always, is there a reason for that? Or if that something's missing and I want to improve the data collection, or I want to improve the way how I report, that could be a next step. I'll pause here because this was a little confusing one. Basically went against every single thing that I said before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question about this, and I didn't catch this a couple slides ago, and this is kind of a hypothetical question. But my understanding is that section A, that's only CSBG expenditures. So then let's say hypothetically, we're jumping into a Head Start grant, that's in section B. So then my question kind of comes to, are you tying, or section C, I said it wrong. Are you tying all of those funding expenditures in section C to services based on kind of what you know about the programs, or is it only CSBG section A?
So I see what you're saying. So Module 2, Section A is expenditures that are CSBG specific, so CSBG dollars. And then once we jump to Section C of Module 2, that's resources, like federal resources, state resources. So when you report Module 4, services and outcomes, that's all services and outcomes that were achieved by participants, regardless of where the dollars were coming from. Does that answer your question? So yes, for example, let's say, let's go back to this scenario. So let's say here we're reporting Head Start because, the agency could have received that, and that will be reported in section C, right? But let's say the agency actually didn't allocate any money towards education in section A, CSBG expenditures. We're still, since you reported that there is, Head Start funds, that you were receiving Head Start funds, we're still kind of trying to see if those services and outcomes were provided, or services provided and outcomes achieved, regardless of the funding source origin, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead, sorry.
And so if we catch these, but we know that what we're reporting is what we want to report, should we put a comment in the module 2 and 4 comments spreadsheet to identify it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my next talking points. Thank you so much for bringing it up. I'll answer your question now, and then I'll talk about it again. Yes. So if this makes sense to you and you understand that there are certain things you choose not to report, right? And you anticipate the warning on your review memo, provide a comment on the comment template right away. So when we do the review of the data, we can kind of reference the review memo against all the warnings and errors against the comment template that you submitted. So if that warning popped up, but you already commented on it, so we can take it off the review memo, right? Because we also value your time, because I would hate for you to put in the same exact verbatim comment that you've already created. So yes, comment template is very, very useful for the review process. And another thing that I do want to say that from the review that we've done, and that was my first time reviewing the data, so I'm relatively new to CSBG, but that was my first time doing the full-on from state plan to annual report, now to the new state plan season, and going into annual report in a couple of months. I know we just finished it, but I know we're already going back. I also learned that sometimes agencies use several databases, right? So you might have that you cannot unduplicate Head Start, right? And we do ask for in section B and section A and section C, unduplicated count of individuals, right? So there are cases where this is 0 because I can't unduplicate them, right? I cannot guarantee that this is unduplicated count. And again, that's where the common template is going to be very useful. And I know I've learned that this year that there are certain programs, especially when the agency and the state uses several databases, and it's sometimes they don't speak to each other, and there's no common denominator to kind of pull that data, and so that could always be the case. I promised Ben that I'll be talking for 40 minutes, but so the next couple of slides, I'll do the review memo overview, and the last minute of this, I'll share what review memo looks like. And there are going to be some common warnings and errors on the review memo, but I do not want to spend too much time on it, because I think the goal of this workshop is just to understand how they speak to each other and how the data collection process can be modified or improved. Or maybe you're just making sure that you're doing everything right. That also, I know that I never had issues reviewing North Dakota review memo. I think you guys I love Region 8. I love working with you guys. It's always, I don't want to say easy, but you make it easy. You do really make it easy. So the review memo, right? So Ben receives the review memo, right? He's the first person who reviews it. And then I did ask him yesterday, because I wanted to make sure that you've seen that format before, or if states distribute the review memos differently, right? Some may copy and paste, some may make one-on-one with agencies. They can send them the whole Excel sheet. They may have different tools how they communicate those warnings and errors once we send them the review memo. So we don't overprescribe it. That's up to the state to decide. But Ben did confirm that he copies and pastes so agency-specific comments and warnings and sends them down. So that's why I just wanted to make sure that you're familiar with the review memo. Again, this is reviews or comments that we've seen overall in the nation. That is not specific to North Dakota. You can see there's no agencies here, so it's just something that we've seen. So do not be alert. It's not putting anyone's on the spot. So this is what it looks like, right? So provide summary of warnings and errors for every agency. And you have some information on the left here with what module, it's going to be module 2 and module 4, what section, what data point, message type, if it's a warning or an error. So this kind of gives you an opportunity to filter. Let's say at first, once you receive it, or Ben, when you receive it, you want to look at errors, right, to see how many errors you had. You can always just filter and to look at errors. And then let's say the next step is to look at warnings, because I know errors are a bit more important to address than warnings, right? And the next tab, you have message description. That is going to be repetitive, right? Because if the item repeats, it's going to be the same language. Action required is a bit more specific on what, given the message description, given the warning or error, what's your next step? How do you fix it? And then the next column, it's a state response, right? So when Ben sends back the review memo to me, I look at the state response, which is essentially the agency responses, right? But the state office is responsible for communicating that. So that's why it's called state response. But I look at this just to make sure that the error or warning was addressed, or if it wasn't addressed or not, solved, mitigated, there could be the reason why, right? And that's why this column is very important, because it gives me a lot of information. And then the final action, that's usually we just put something, I either leave it blank or I put that if there was a lot of back and forth about a specific item, I do want to make sure that, that item was closed. I put something like OCS considers this item closed. And then the final kind of column, it's close or open, but I think it's more for the state office. So I'm not going to bore you too much with this. So some of the important terms are warnings, errors, and state response, right? Warnings are flags that are for the secondary review, right? So basically, if there's a warning, that means that the data point was flagged, and we want you to look a bit more close to it. So all scenarios that we just walked through, they're all warnings, right? It's more so the component is missing, can you confirm that? And usually we'll say, please verify that the data is correct, right? And from my review that I've done this year for 2 regions, I've noticed that, warnings, the majority of warnings are, will stand as is. So the agency just confirms that, yes, the data point is correct. The state makes sure that they capture it in the way that, in the tools and the processes that they have implemented. And then they send it back to us. So, if the data is correct, there's, the item is closed. So now errors, they indicate that the data point requires correction. So it's a bit more like the way how I understand it's like it's a credit check. You have a soft check and a hard check, right? So hard check stays for, I believe, 2 years. I just learned that a couple of years ago. So error is a bit more, hey, seems like there's a logical issue or there's like an important component missing that has to be there. Please address that. Well, now, can the error not be fixed? That could be the case, right? So, and that's where common template comes in place, where that's where the state response, you can communicate with your state lead agency why that error occurred, why cannot be solved. But I believe that in from the review, all the errors that popped up, they were all corrected. There was no issues. But just so you know that data is not perfect as much as I wish. Another title that I do have is a data analyst. So as much as I want data to be perfect, I understand that there's a lot of human component goes into it, and that has to be into account as well. So we're all humans, and I always understand if there's something going on. Always, but just keep in mind that again, errors are a bit more serious items. And again, state response are comments addressing those warnings and errors. So those are some tips and tricks on how to respond to comments. And again, Ben, I will not overprescribe it. If you have certain policies or procedures that are in place on how you communicate with agencies, please continue doing that, or you want to improve something, that's totally fine. But that was presented to the state offices. That's when we receive the review memo. That helps us a ton when we do our review memo, right? So explicitly confirm whether the response is being updated. So if there are no revisions, again, you can just provide that data is correct as initially submitted. And if there is clarification, provide clarification. And if there are revisions, briefly describe the revision. And another item that I do like to see when the data is updated, what it is updated to, right? So if we say the old number was 20, but it needs to be updated to 40, I know it's extra, couple of keyboard clicks, but it really helps during the data review process, because then I can match what's an online data collection system versus on the review memo, because again, the technologies are not perfect, and sometimes even when you upload the corrected form, something can break, something can just happen along the lines. It happens rarely, but it can happen. Something can happen with coding. I had a state where I look at the smart form, everything's fine. The second I switch it to XML, like I don't know, something happens. It's not in the same place. So I can manually correct that, but unless I know what number should be there, I cannot do that for you. So it's very, very useful when we know what the data was updated to or what revised to. Again, this is just tips and tricks. That's not necessarily something that you must do, but it really aids the data review process. And I do want to, I think we might want to skip through that because I do want to leave a little bit of questions because review memo, it's very similar. It's just going to be the same thing as here, right? It just shows some common warnings and errors that we've seen during the review process, but I think that is just extra piece of information that might not be too much of a value right now, right? I think the most important thing is to know that why those warnings and errors appear and what to do about them, right? So why they appear, we kind of discussed that in those scenarios, and then how to address them, that's what we discuss right now. So some of the resources, again, you will have this PowerPoint, so you can click on it. Those are live links. It's going to be in the form of PDF, but it's the same thing. So the first on-demand resource is the CSBG annual report, right? So when you receive Module 2 and Module 4 smart forms, there's tabs, you have to click through it. But let's say you just want to look at one long PDF document. This is what it is. And sometimes for me, I do paper and pencil still. I do not like to take notes on the computer. I do like when things are printed right in front of me because I can take notes and I'm like visually it's better. And then it's just our life is on computers right all the time. So sometimes I just like to stare at the paper. The next one is the CSBG annual report toolkit. Also provides some resources if you want to click on it, see what's there. Could be useful. And then the last two items is the webinar series that we did put with our partners at NASCAS. Tiffany, I'm looking at you. You don't see me. There's half a face. But those were last year, so they are very useful. Again, a lot of this information that was presented today was pulled from different modules, except the scenarios. That was brand new. You guys were the first ones to go through it. I hope it was useful. But if you want to jump through those links to see more details. Module 2 and Module 4 goes in a lot of details about different data points. But Tiffany, I think you'll be going over some. I didn't want to kind of double down on that, but it does go into a lot of detail. If you have time, it's a bit lengthy, but there is PowerPoint is available. The PDF version of the PowerPoint is available. Also, the transcriptions are there, so it's very user-friendly, and those are links for YouTube as well. And this year, we will be putting out new webinars, so stay on the lookout for that as well. And then we have a little bit of time taking questions. I don't feel too bad because there were a couple of questions as we were going, so I just hope that I left enough time, but I wanted to go at a slower pace so I don't just jump through it and exit the meeting. Just wanted to make sure that the value is there's value in what I'm presenting. So if you have any questions, please just speak up or put them in the chat. And I'll stop sharing unless there's something specific that you want me to jump back so we can talk about it all more. If nothing, I'll stop sharing so I can put you guys back here so you don't see half of my face.
Thank you very much, Lena. If you have questions, I mean, we have Tiffany coming up in a little bit as well, and she's more than like to answer the questions. So it's not like at the when we use that we won't have resources. So I think those scenarios were super helpful. Like, and the question that Sarah popped up, about just different allocations and were really good, because I think there can be a lot of confusion on what we do with obviously not what's really much. So, yeah, does anybody have any specific questions or clarifications on what in the box of the table?
I was just wondering if you can think of any examples of a place that, how they're tracking this and separating it, any kind of like best practices for how to kind of put this into operations. And I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit about module 3 and what kind of projects you see fitting into module 3, because I've had confusion about that, but I don't know who the most appropriate person is to talk about that.
So I think the first question is probably, it's more of a data collection question, right? So I would think that I'm sure we have resources, Tiffany, that NASCAS has on best data collection practices and stuff, but a lot of it is federal office doesn't prescribe how to do it. There are certain items that we talked about today, right? How the modules speak, but we do not overprescribe the specific data collection process. So I will leave it to Ben and Tiffany to maybe elaborate on that, but I will jump on module 3. I know that in the past module 3 was, it is still encouraged, right? So it's optional, it's encouraged, but there is no specific definition of what initiative is, right? So, and that's always confusing. So there are some resources that I actually, before this webinar, because I knew that module 3 is going to come up and we're not talking about module 3 today. NASCAS does have some module 3 resources available, but we are talking in the federal office on how we can aid the module 3 review, because right, it cannot be looked the same way as module 2 and module 4, right? It's a lot of qualitative data, so it's not necessarily you said X here, so you have to say Y here. There are certain validations built in, and there are certain expectations, right? If you provided that it's you know there are interim outcomes and then we don't see outcomes, it's a question, right? So that's that technological component, but a lot of it is qualitative work. So we are still working in the federal office on what resources we can provide and how we can aid that. So that's still in the works, so stay tuned.
Well, thank you for that explanation, and this is Denise again. And I appreciated the little bit more detail on the review memo and the fact that it's, it's not saying that we did anything wrong, but it's more just take another look at this and, explain if you can why that's happening, and just, but again, it speaks to for each of our agencies to have a good sense of what your data is, how it looks, and so that those things too are easy to identify, and to check the warnings and errors document and before you submit to Ben, so that some of these things will pop out, by just giving it another eyeball before you forward it on. And but yeah, it's just another set of eyeballs looked at this and had another question. So it's just a helpful document.
Thank you, and I do really appreciate the good feedback about review memo, because when I look at the review memo, the last thing that I want is to put anyone on the spot, right? So it's not for me. I'm removed from the work that is done on the ground level in North Dakota, and I'm a data person, right? So I don't know what programs are happening. I don't know the personnel. I don't know the specific situations. Every agency experiences something that is very unique to them, and I do not want to assume things. When I review the data, I never want to assume things. So even when it's an error, we can always talk that through. You can talk that through with Ben. Ben can talk that through with me. So that's never an issue. And again, for me, data is just, it puts all this work, incredible work that's being done. And my heart is with you every day, because I tell myself every day, I do not think I could be on the ground every day. It is tremendous amount of work tremendous amount of compassion. So, and I know that when it comes to data, that's maybe not what is sitting with you every day because you have people lining up outside, right? So, but when I look at data, to me, that creates a picture, and sometimes that picture might be incomplete, right? But once we have those comments, we can kind of complete that picture. And I do want to hijack. I know I'm a little over time, Ben. I'm so sorry. I did tell him that I like talking. I'm so sorry. I do want to share the comment template that I mentioned. Let me share my screen back. That was mentioned before, right? So what is the comment template, just in case if you weren't familiar with it, just making sure that I'm sharing the correct screen. Okay, so I do have this another item that's called comment template, and that is universal. It's not connected to UEIs or agency name. It is an Excel form, so I'll open it. Hopefully there are no unblocked macros or something like that. It doesn't have to be. There are no macros there, I hope. Macros is another piece of technology that is, I hope to excel at one day. Okay, so let me zoom in. So this is what the common template looks like, and that's shared with state lead agency. And it is basically drop-down menus. And the way how it's coded, in the first column, once you pick the state, you choose your state. I'll go to North Dakota. The agency name is going to be, so the only agencies that you'll see are that pertain to the state of North Dakota. So that's kind of nitty gritty. So you don't have to look through like 1,000 eligible entities within the country. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to pick on one. It doesn't it doesn't mean anything. So I just pick an agency, then you just go and pick the module where you anticipate that the warning or error can come up, right? And the data that you fill out is sometimes there's a trend between years, and that's why there is a previous year data, right? So let's say last year you allocated money to employment, but then you did a community needs assessment and you realize that, oh, we do have a problem with affordable housing, a lot of people who are unhomed. So we're actually going to put our efforts into housing and there's going to be no employment. But you know that, oh, they probably are going to ask why last year there was employment, this year there's no expenditures in employment. So I anticipate they're coming right away. So in module 2, that pertains to module 2, I'm clicking module 2, then I click the section. So that's the expenditures, the data point, that's A2A. And now it sounds crazy, like I just know all the points, but I do it every day, so it's pretty easy to remember. And then you choose the message description. So, and if there's something, the message description doesn't, you don't see the message description that you need, you can just always put other. I believe that there is this option. Yeah. And then you can provide justification. I actually believe there is no, that validation is not built in for expenditures. I think it's built in for resources. Actually, no, there is. It looks a bit different. Significant decrease or increase from previous or year data or no data reported. Sorry, I'm taking my words back. So let's say it's decrease in this case, right? So we don't provide anything in employment, and then you can put justification. And justification needs to be clear and concise. It doesn't have to be long, but as long as you, it's thorough and it, gets the point across that all that matters. And another point that I do want to share that I wish we could see in the future. There would be no wars, no hunger, because I would solve it all, but we can't. So, unfortunately. So will you have warnings and errors in the review memo? Oh, 100%. Well, let me take that back. I apologize. There could be next year where, after all these workshops, there's no warnings or no errors. And I think I will be out of the job because I will have nothing to review for North Dakota. But that is the goal that we want to have. But most likely there will be some errors and warnings for some agencies because we cannot predict everything, right? And sometimes something could have been missed. Something could have been entered by mistake, an erroneous number. I usually when I type, I want to type 2 and then I accidentally typed 5 because it's right above the 2 on the keyboard. Could that happen? 100%. So do not be upset that if you receive some comments in the review memo. I feel like right now there are tools on how you can respond to it, how you can revise the data. So again, warnings and errors, just to reiterate what Denise said, it's not putting anyone on the spot. It's more so, hey, just look at the data, make sure that it's correct. If there's something that you want to correct, please do so. And we always, always, always appreciate your effort. And especially when there are thorough explanations, oh, that's what I like to read. That's my reading for the day. Get my pages in. I did hijack extra 7 minutes. I do apologize. So I will stop talking. And Ben, thank you so much for this opportunity. I love to be here, love to see all the faces, love to interact. So I'm zipped now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lena. I appreciate all of the, foundational work, just with foundations and all the macro stuff. It's maybe elementary stuff, but we have to start somewhere, and we got to make sure we're all on the same page. It's like really appreciate the walkthrough for different scenarios and answering the questions that we've got. So, question for the group: do we want to take like a 5-minute break before we hear from Tiffany? That'd be good. Tiffany, is that okay?
That works fine.
So we'll come back at say 10:14. Thank you, Lena. Have a great rest of your day, and I appreciate all your effort. And we'll be back here at 10:14. Turn your camera on to verify it.
Over. There you go. You're unmuted. Oh, here's this.
All right, let's get started on our second half. So I'm very excited to have Tiffany Jarvis here from NASCAS. And Tiffany, we will let you have the floor. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm going to get my screen shared. And for those that want to follow along, there is a PDF in the chat. So let me start sharing, and I want to get into presentation mode. Maybe. Is it going to let me go into presentation mode? There we go. Okay. So we are here to continue talking about the CSBG annual report and get into some of the more detailed elements of it. We're going to focus mostly on module 2 and 4. We are going to talk just briefly about module 3. So first of all, I am Tiffany Jarvis. I am the Director of Research at NASCASP. And NASCASP is the membership association for the state offices for both the CSBG and weatherization. We're a sister organization to NCAP, whereas NCAP is for the state associations and the agencies. NASCASP is for the state offices, but we do work very closely together because CSBG is just one big happy family, and also OCS is included in that. They're a big partner for us. So first, a disclaimer, I just need to let you know that we are using federal funds, or I am, to bring this presentation to you. We do not necessarily represent the opinions and views of HHS, so I just wanted to add that. Now, today's presentation, we're going to go, why are we here? Well, because we want a smooth, successful, error-free FY24 annual report submission for you guys. We're going to do this by learning about the report sections, how everything works together. And we've talked a little bit about that earlier, and I'm going to get into a little bit more detailed examples, or some additional examples, top validation issues that are common for North Dakota. And I agree, your guys' review memo was not very large compared to some other states. So you guys did a really good job on data quality and answering questions. And then I'm also here to answer any of your questions. No question is simple. No question is too detailed. No question is stupid. I want to hear those questions because the purpose of this training is for you guys to get what you need when it comes time for you to do the FY24 report, which is actually coming very close. It's soon. The end of this month is the end of the federal fiscal year. I know that you guys operate on a calendar year, so it might be slightly different. What is today's agenda? We're going to do a report overview. Understanding the why, we don't often get that when we are looking at the report, data validations, report sections, and Q&A. So just a quick overview of the report. Elena mentioned this too. There are 4 modules. Module 1 is the state module. Module 2 is the agency module, about capacity, resources, and CSBG expenditures. Module 3 is the community level, and Module 4 is the individual and families. So they all really do tie together. But that's all I'm going to talk about on that, because we're going to get more into the details with Module 2 and 4. But I want to first get you guys to understand the why. Why are we doing the annual report? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I'm going to focus mostly on the federal side of things. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with OCS's PEAK framework, performance, evaluation, accountability, accessibility, and knowledge. If not, I would encourage you to look at this because there are a lot of different elements in the CSBG, what we call performance management. Some of the things are very specific to what an agency does, such as a community needs assessment. Some are very specific to what the state office does, which is the accountability measures and the monitoring and oversight. But then you see under accountability, there's the CSBG annual report. Under accessibility, there's the CSBG annual report again, or the OCS annual report. And it's used to build, OCS uses the data to build into their report. There's a congressional report, and then there's soon to be a performance management website that's going to be unveiled. And then knowledge is a CSBG annual report. So just kind of seeing the entirety of everything that you guys do actually does feed into this framework. So let's talk a little bit about the report to Congress. This is something that OCS is legislatively required to submit annually to Congress. The most recent version on their website is from fiscal year 2021. 2022 will be probably coming soon. It's just going through the final federal review. And there's a link to it. So if you want to see what the reports look like currently, FY23 is going to probably look differently. But the goal for the report to Congress is to have an accurate, robust national report to demonstrate accountability with federal funds and to showcase the great things that are happening at the local level. So how are we using the resources? Are we using them correctly? And what are we doing with those resources? Because there's some great things happening out there and we want to celebrate those and highlight them. So that is our goal. And so when you submit data, your data feeds into the state data. The state's data feeds into the national data. And you may not think as an individual agency you would have much impact on the federal report, but you really do. Sometimes, other times, it's a collection of multiple agencies that unfortunately lead into data quality issues. So it's very important to understand that data quality issues at the local level does actually impact the network's ability to meet its goal on the national level. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So, you know, we look at the significant differences between years, and most people do not like this validation. But the reason why it exists is to help catch when there is something wrong. And here's an example. This is a particular performance indicator. In FY22, the national total was 87,000. When we were reviewing the data in FY23, it jumped to 5 million. That was one agency. I wish to say it wasn't, but that was one agency. So this went from the agency's review, didn't catch it, went to the state's review, didn't catch it, went to the federal review, we caught it. It was corrected, but it was a significant error. Mismatch between primary and dependent data points, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. In this particular case, the primary and the dependent data point should be equal to each other. And in this case, they're not equal. And so when we're reporting this on the national level, it looks like the sum of everything, the primary, is smaller than everything that went into it. When that's not the way it's supposed to be, this one should be equal. They should be exactly equal. And it'll make more sense when we start getting into some examples. And then there's just a mismatch between unduplicated number of customers served, services, results, resources. So we may be looking like we have a lot more money, but we're not really reporting a lot of outcomes. We may be reporting a lot of outcomes or services, but not a lot of money. So it's an entirety. You look at, as Elena said, you look at the report as in its whole, and then you can kind of see where everything kind of works together. So the solution is to understand, to review, confirm or correct, and create a data equality culture. So what I mean is understand is know what you're reporting. That's important. There's a lot of resources about the annual report. There's instruction manuals, and not everybody seems to to know that there's instruction manuals, but it does provide a lot more detail than the report itself. Review. Like I said, there's 3 levels of review. There's the first internal agency review. You know your data. When you get to the state level and you get to the federal level, we just are looking just at numbers. We can tell you something doesn't look right, but you know your information. So it may be right to you and there just may be a valid explanation, but only you know that. Confirm or correct, that's important. That's what talks about, looking at your data. And if you did make an error when you put 5 million, when you only met 2,000, that is definitely something that you want to correct. But in the event that that was correct, then confirm it is. And then create a data quality culture. I'm not going to go into a lot of this today because it's a whole different session, but just wanted to really highlight that federally, HHS uses this FCSM framework for data quality, and it includes utility, objectivity, and integrity. We're going to talk largely about the objectivity section, accuracy and reliability. The other things are very important, but we're just not going to go into that a lot today. And there's a PDF that you can see where you can actually get into more of what this framework is. But it's just very important that this is what we use when we're talking about data quality. How to create a data quality culture. And so this, somebody asked about kind of best practices. There is not usually a single right or wrong answer because every organization is unique. Some organizations decide to have a single data system. Some work to marry their systems together through data interoperability. Some, just have practices in place. So there's not really a one way to do it, but there is a right way to go about figuring out what's best for you. And the first thing is what is being reported? What should your agency be track? Well, if you have a weatherization program, then you may want to look at which specific indicators and services and resources are specific to weatherization. Head start. So you first need to identify what of the annual report, and it's a huge beastie, right? There's a lot of FNPIs, there's a lot of services, there's a lot of resources to Section C, but most of them do not apply to your agency. So you have to figure out what applies to your agency. When is it being tracked? Who's responsible for tracking? How is this information tracked? And are all of those that are tracking it in the know? So there's some in the instruction manuals, there's some very specific things about, additional details that you're not just getting in how the FNPI reads, or that this service does require an unduplicated count, but this particular service, it is acceptable to do a duplicated count. The individuals that are tracking for you, are they aware of those nuances? How is the data being reviewed? So this is very important. What is being reported is data collection. How is it being reviewed is that analysis part. Who's responsible for reviewing the data? When is it being reviewed and what is being reviewed? And one thing that I can tell you about when the data is being reviewed, this is an important question to answer at your agency, because if you wait until the end of your reporting period to look at your data, you may find an error that maybe you had a new staff person and was just tracking something incorrectly. If you waited at the very end, then it's sometimes hard to go back and correct when it's easier, 12 months worth of data, when it might be easier to go back and correct it with 3 months worth of data, and then correcting the error for the next 9 months so it doesn't get recreated. So maybe some TNTA with that staff person. So when the data is being reviewed is very important. And what is being reviewed. So there's different levels of data review. You can be very detailed. And so there's some things that we look at on the federal level that you may want to, which is on the highest level, but there's some things on the agency level that you may want to look at more closely. And I'll get into an example of that later, but just know that you need to figure out what your organization wants to review and what is the outcome of the review. I always say that we need to reward good behavior. So that's important. If somebody's doing something really good, or just celebrating, hey, you guys, as a group, a team, we've done really good job data collection, and I've reviewed your data and it looks great. So acknowledge when things are going well, but also acknowledge when there are errors that need to be fixed and figuring out how those errors are going to be fixed, because it's easier to be proactive than reactive. Okay, so that's the data quality. I just wanted to get a little bit into that. So data validations. Elena went through this too, and I'm just going to go quickly. There's 2 types of validations. There's warnings. The data requires a second look. One thing that I want to add here is the data may actually be an error, but only you can answer that question. It's your data. All we can tell you on the national level, it looks a bit wonky. I like that word. It looks a little wonky. The numbers don't fully make sense based off of just looking at the numbers themselves. Only you as an agency can look at the data and say, yes, it is correct, or no, it's not. And then confirm if correct or fix if not correct. And you can do that prior to submitting your report, which is always very helpful, or you can do it after when you get your review memo. Errors, it's saying that something is wrong. The data is incorrect and the data needs to be fixed. Now I'm going to add a little caveat to this because sometimes the data cannot be fixed in retro, but can be fixed future going. And so if you're not able to fix something that is an error, then that's, Lena talked about that too. You justify, you provide an explanation of why. You're acknowledging, yes, there is an error, and you're explaining that we are not able to fix it, but we are going to do it future going. So just that kind of acknowledgement. So it's not just important to say, identify, yes, there's an error, but also implementing those practices, a part of that data quality culture about how you can fix it forward going. So you do not keep repeating the same errors over and over again. I want to comment that sometimes I've seen on review memos that an agency says it's not an error. It is an error. It just may not be an error you can fix, but if it's an error on your review memo, then it really is an error. Data validation categories. We're going to probably change the validations a little bit this year, not the content of them or what is being reviewed, but how we're going to put them into buckets or categories. So the first category is changes between current and previous fiscal year. This is a warning. This is when you're going to get that your data is either 100% more or 100% or 50% less, or you reported 0 last year and you're reporting money this year, or you reported money last year, or you're reporting 0, or you're reporting money this year, but you reported 0 last year, and vice versa. So these are warnings because there is a very good reason why the numbers have changed. Well, we just finished CARES. Well, when we first started CARES, everybody's CSBG allocation went way up. The amount that you put into a certain expenditure category may have went up. That is logical. Weatherization just recently, a couple of years ago, received bill funding. And so we would expect to see weatherization to increase over those between the years. And then we expect when bill funding's done, it's going to go back down. So that's just kind of, but sometimes, and I gave you that example of 87,000 versus 5 million, that was caught via this type of validation. And in that particular case, because it was an error for that agency. It was a warning on the national level, but when the agency looked at their data, it was really an error that they had to fix. The dependent data point is larger. It is an error. We're going to go through this a little bit more, but there are a lot of data points between different sections, between the same section, that are dependent upon each other. I also refer to them as child and parent indicators. And in this particular warning, the child indicator cannot exceed the parent. So that's very important. So that's what this is saying. It's an error because the child is more than the parent. Incongruency between data points, we're probably going to change the language on this, but this is a warning. This would be, and the Elena's example is, hey, you're reporting services or you're reporting expenditures, but you're not reporting services. You're reporting expenditures, but not reporting services. That's incongruent between those two data points because logically you would expect if you're expending money in that area, you're also going to be providing services in that area, but not always the case, which is why it's a warning and not an error. But it's just saying, hey, look at these couple of data points and make sure that they make sense to each other. Summation issue, this is an error. For you guys that use the smart forms, you're in luck. There's a lot more summation issues that can be obtained in states that do not use the smart forms because if their systems are not programmed with the same validations as the smart forms are. But for the agencies that use smart forms, the summation issue becomes only in Module 4, Section C, which is the client characteristics. And we'll go more into that. It is just basically saying that here is one indicator and the sum of these other indicators, they must equal each other. Missing data, it's an error. And this is when we'll get into a couple examples, but there's some data points that require 3 pieces of information, and if you don't have all 3 pieces, then it's considered an error. Sometimes it's a parent-child, that if you select the parent, then you have to have information in the child, so that's considered missing data. Or sometimes we'll see an agency has data in the child but doesn't have anything in the parent, so that's where missing data is. Other validation issues, these vary from errors and warnings. It just depends on what it is the issue is. So pitfalls to avoid when you're looking at your data validations: not correcting errors prior to submission. That's really important. You can be proactive and correct it before, and then your review memo on the federal level is going to look very small. And so the exception is if you're not able to correct a past error and you correct it forward going, that might be a case when you cannot correct something. Trying to explain insignificant differences. Unfortunately, smart forms are programmed to look at numbers at 100% different or 50% different, depending on which way it goes, and then zeros versus a number or a number versus zeros. There's sometimes small, insignificant things that are going to be captured. If you go from 1 to 2, well, there's 100%. Do not try to explain all of those insignificant ones. Look for the ones that are more significant. If you go from 0 school districts and you go to 100 this year, that is a little bit more significant, because it's like you're going from, or 1 or 2, and now you're going to 100. So look at things that are more significant, that because small numbers can cause something to look more significant than what it is. Going above and beyond in explanations, it's important to give just enough information based off of what your state wants you to explain and what the feds would like to see, but also you can overdo it. So just kind of be careful. Know about what is good information to explain, how much information you need to provide. So that's really kind of important. Have those conversations internally and then with your state. Fixing one issue can cause a new validation issue. That's just something to be on the lookout for. Confusing cannot exceed with must equal kind of goes back to those 2 different categories I talked about, where the summation is must equal, whereas the dependent indicator is, or the dependent data point is larger. That's a cannot exceed. So just making sure that you understand the difference between cannot exceed and must equal. And treating sections as standalones. I'm not going to go into that because we talked, Lena talked a lot about this, so that was good. And not using unknown and not reported correctly when it comes to the client characteristics, which is Module 4, Section C. So just a little bit more. When we're talking about dependent larger than the primary, there's a couple of cues that you can look for. And I've given you some examples of the CSBG funds reported above. So use that language of the. Usually implies that it is a child indicator or child data point. Here's another example of an indentation where you see B4G is to the left, and then the 4 little subs under it are further to the right. That's a visual cue saying that this is a parent with 4 children. Another clue with this one that tells you that this is dependent is you see that the blank cell is, I have a green square under it. That data point, you can actually manually put numbers into it. It's not grayed out. If it's grayed out, that's telling you it's a sum. If it's not grayed out and it's asking you to put a number into it, then that is a dependent. It's telling you that's the parent of it and it has dependence. So it's a dependence larger than primary kind of example. This is a visual from left to right, and this is specific to the indicators. That column 1 is to the left, and column 3 is to the right. So look at it that way. That 1 has to be, 3 cannot exceed 1. And then here's another example of kind of the 4B example, the B4G example up there, where you can enter into data into the parent, which is 1H, and you can also put data into 1H.1, 1.H2, 1H.3. So that indicates that those are children of 1H and follows the dependent larger. So it's important to note when you see this type of thing, it's not that the children are summed together to create a total for 1H, because you may have, I always use weatherization example for the 4BG. If you have an agency that has a weatherization program and you are doing energy audits as well as the quality assurance inspections, well, what your staff, you may have 3 staff on that are part of your weatherization program. Maybe 2 of them are only energy auditors, so you're going to put 2 there. And you're going to, and let's say that's all we have. So we're going to put 2 at the top. We're going to put 2 energy auditors in 4G1, and we're going to put 1 under quality control inspectors because, excuse me, I said that wrong. We have 3. We have 3 staff. So you put 3 in 4G. 3 of those staff have the energy auditor certification. You're going to put 3 there as well. But 1 of those 3 also is a quality control inspector. In that particular case, you're going to put 1 under 4G4. So 3 staff, unduplicated, 4G is unduplicated. 4G1 is unduplicated, that has the energy auditor certification, and 4G4 is the unduplicated that has the quality control or the QCI. If you added those together, you would get a total of 4. But those don't get added together. So that's kind of important to just kind of understand how those work together, whereas each of the individual children cannot exceed the parent. So if we had 3 under home energy certifications, the 4G, you had 3 there, but you had 4 under 4G4, that is a child that is larger than the primary, because 4 has to be equal to or less than, or simpler, we say cannot exceed 4G. So I hope that makes sense. These ones tend to give some agencies a little bit more complication. Sometimes it's how the data system is set up. Sometimes I will not see numbers in the parent, but there will only be numbers in the children. And that is the same, cannot exceed. So it's important to make sure that you are tracking these correctly. Okay, so that's just this thing about you can't look at, you do not aggregate these together. Summation, now you're going to be looking also for some clues. It's hard to tell with this. You'll see it better when it comes to the smart forms. This is just a screenshot, but the shading is so light. But you see there's zeros already in there. And if you try to click on it, you cannot. It will not allow you to add data to it. So this is telling you that 5I1 and 5I2 get added together to come up with 5I. So that's a clue. This is another one. Oh, I duplicated it. Sorry about that. Here's another example where you see B. This shading you can see is darker, and the 11G, that shading is darker. So that is telling you that those are summations. And with smart forms, like I said, you cannot actually manually enter data into those shaded columns. Some starting places. Start with expected differences versus unexpected differences. Because with weatherization, you expected your money to go up. You expected, since your money went up, then you would expect your actual services and your outcomes to go up. If they don't, if one goes up but the other one doesn't, that's wonkiness. And that's something internally you guys need to look at and kind of go, why does our data look a little wonky? There may be a reason. Maybe you have more money because it's allocated under resources and you haven't quite fully completed some weatherization jobs yet. And so they're going to be moving over to the next year to report. So there are reasons why it could be wonky, but just you've got to figure out why. Correcting previous issues. So sometimes you had an error last year, and if you corrected it this year, of course there's going to be differences between how it was reported last year and this year. Identifying which cells is the culprit. This is important because especially when it's a dependent data point or incongruency or summation, you need to identify where the initial issue started, because that will, if the total is correct or in the number of energy unduplicated staff that have energy certifications. If that's correct, then and that number is 4, and you have a 5 down below, then you know that 5 is incorrect. So it kind of helps you identify where you need to start fixing it. So figure out which is most correct. Figure out what is missing or what is wrong, because if you get one of the missing errors, well, why is it missing? Where can you get that data? Is it possible? Outcome language versus service language. This is specific to the NPIs. If you use the Z indicators, if you say the number of people participated, that's a service or an output versus an outcome. So what was the so what of the participation? So that's important. Language, how you word it, sometimes matters. And does it make sense? That is the first point. First place to start. Does it make sense to your organization? Because if it doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to make sense to anybody else. Module 2. Okay. I'm going to stop really quick and say, is there any questions about that? Just kind of overview. Okay. So module 2, this is looking at CSBG eligible entity, expenditures, capacity, and resources. Modules have multiple sections, and these are the 3 sections for this. So let's look at section A, CSBG expenditures. This is where you are being asked to identify what your statewide reporting period is. I do not believe anybody from North Dakota received this error, but in the event in the future going, every agency, I believe there's 7 of you, have to select the exact same option when it comes to A1. If somebody selects, let's say 6, select A1. Well, actually, you guys are, I do believe in A1C, right? January 1st to December 31st. If somebody selects B and everybody else selects 6, then that one agency is going to get an error saying you've selected something different. Now, so that's important. Expenditures. The important word here is expenditures. This means what you have spent versus allocated means what money you have on the book. So imagine a checking account. You have $100 in your checking account. $50 has been, you've wrote a check for $50. That money has been expended, but your total allocation is that 100. So it's of the 100 what you have left or what you've you have used to date. So that's expenditures. Expenditures can be equal to or less than your allocation. Most likely it's less than, but it usually can be equal to. But then CSBG is a little wonky because you have carryover. It depends on if you have any carryover funds. So it's not absolutely 100% where the allocation is smaller than the expenditures. A couple things, best fit. There are a lot of different categories. And the first several, so 2A to 2G, are really related to what you're doing in Module 4. These are direct services that you're doing, but also Module 3, because you're working on those domains. Whereas linkages, agency capacity building, and other is a little wonky. It can actually be kind of either or, but H and I are usually more of kind of how the agency is using its funds. Is it, partnering with lots of organizations? Is it, agency capacity? What training are you doing? And so it's important to note that this is just CSBG dollars. We're not asking what the agency has done holistically for agency capacity building, but only what the CSBG dollars that went towards it. And so finding out the best fit. And sometimes it's not as straightforward. If you have an employment program and has kind of an added bonus of maybe a health, physical, and so maybe that employment program, a person had some teeth issue and you help them fix it. Well, there's a service and an outcomes under the health domain that you may be tracking health and service outcomes over there, But because it was through your employment program, you may just put it all of your expenditures under employment, and that is okay. So you need to identify what is the best fit. And when you do that, make sure you can support it. If somebody calls you out and says, hey, why are you putting it there? Be able to answer that question. And consistency from year to year is really important, because I'll tell you, if you have a fiscal officer that has changed from what from the previous year to the current year, and if there's no documentation, everybody looks at things through a little different lens. And this is when I see most of the money chain differences, especially with how funds are allocated, unless it's a CARES year, but or a significant change in how you do your programming because your community needs assessment says, hey, we need to do something else. This is, there's a lot of consistency from year to year. And if there's not, that's the first thing I ask you is, was there a change in your fiscal person? Service cross comparison. So that's important. Programmatic versus admin. So it's important to understand that A2 is all of your funds, not just what went into the programs, but also what went into your admin. So it's important to understand the definitions of the difference between a programmatic cost and an admin cost, because when it comes to A3, whereas A2, you're saying employment, we're going to look at everything that went into it, whereas A3 is of that, how much went towards admin. So that's kind of important to be able to, and sometimes people will put the agency capacity building for their admin, and that's okay. That's just one approach. Others use kind of a, well, we used, $300 in CSBG funds to help support our board, and 50% of our outcomes were underemployment. So we're going to put 50% of those expenses to, of those admin expenses to employment. There's a lot of very specific, details that you can get into, but it's not always necessary that you have to get into. It needs to be reasonable, but do not go crazy trying to make yourself penny by penny. Okay. So, but just understand the difference between admin and programmatic. And so look at the definitions. And 2K is a child. So the admin, the A3 is a child of 2K. So that is saying that A3 has to be equal to or less than or cannot exceed the total, because admin is included in A2, but A3 is only looking at admin. So that's important. Under agency capacity building, under A2J, that is a parent, and the child is A4. So you say that you've used CSBG money towards agency capacity building. A4 is asking you, so how did you use those money? And it's just saying, you check all that apply. You have to check at least one, but you select only the ones that are applicable. So that's important. Now, when I told you earlier about trying to figure out what is incorrect, which is the most correct data point, helps you kind of figure out what is incorrect. Maybe you have something in community, let's say strategic planning, that's check marked, but there is zero money in agency capacity building. Did you guys work on a strategic plan that year? If so, then that may be correct. But then you have to ask a secondary question. Did your organization actually use CSBG dollars towards that strategic plan? If so, then you would expect to have money in 2I as well as strategic planning being checkmarked. If you did not use CSBG dollars, then you would expect 0 in 2I and nothing checked in A4. You would not expect a strategic planning because this is only about CSBG dollars. So I cannot tell you if strategic plan is correct and 0 in 2I is incorrect. Only you can answer that. But all I can tell you is something is missing because you have data in one but not the other. Another child, so A4 actually other becomes the parent because of the below please specify equals the child. Sometimes what I see agencies do here is just kind of put general comments under the section. There are no sections on the smart forms that you put comments. And so this is not, there was on CARES, but not on the regular. So if you have a 0 in 2I and nothing, you want to make sure that this is left blank, the below please specify. And you only want to have something here if other is checked, because it will always cause a validation error. So a little deeper dive, we talked a little bit about that, where I'm not going to go into it, but because Elena really covered that really good. But here's just a visual example of those two. But I do want to comment about something about the arrow, because this is very important. You need to pay attention to the arrow, but also this one saying that we're only looking on the national level comparison between Module 2 and Module 4. If you may be working on a Module 3 employment initiative, you are not going to have services under that because these are individual and family. So be very mindful of it. So that may be one of the reasons why you say in your justification, hey, we are doing employment, but we're doing it on the community level. So we would not have, services. Now, like I said, deeper dive here. Look at the direction of the arrow. This tells you how this dependency works. This is saying that it works only one way. And the reason for this is you can have services, but no CSBG dollars. Because, if you have a Head Start program or weatherization program, you're going to have services in those particular areas, but you didn't use any CSBG money, so you may not have any CSBG allocation or expenditures under B, which is employment, or D, which is housing. And that is perfectly okay. This is a one way. If you have something in your CSBG expenditures, then we would expect logically that something would be in employment services. We don't know which one. We're just we're looking as a whole. So that arrow matters. So agency capacity is section B. So we've got a couple parents and children's here. So B3A, total volunteer hours, is the parent. And of those hours, how many were donated by individuals with low incomes? So again, you have both the visual here of indentation. You also have a visual or a numeric differentiation, because if you have a 3A and a 3A1, that's implying also a child to the larger one. And we've already talked about 4G. And then we have 4BM, other. This is the parent. So if you indicate that a number under 4BM, then you need to put some text in the lines below the parent, or it will be a validation issue. Okay, so section C, resources. Allocated. This is very important to know the difference. And allocated means what you have available to expend during that reporting period, versus expenditures is what you have expended. And this is, I mentioned this because this is where some of the differences may be from fiscal person to fiscal person. Because if one is looking at, well, I'm just running a report, not off, and I don't pay attention to the money we have available. I'm only looking at what we spent to date. And the next person actually does it based off of what, whatever your grant is, then that may be the discrepancy there. So it's important to know, again, the difference between some of the phrases that are in the report. Other, this is a visual thing. I just want to let you guys know that when you actually see the report in its entirety, there are 10 different lines that you can actually input other. So there's HHS other, there's federal other, and there's state other. OLDC will only allow 4. And that's why the smart forms looks different than the big report, because the smart forms are based off of what you can implement or upload into OLDC. So just that, I just want to explain why there's a little discrepancy between those two. Requires complete, correct, formatted answer. So other, depending on if it's HHS other or federal other, there are 3 pieces of data that you must provide. And it must be provided in the correct format, or you're going to get that missing data validation. So under this, the first thing is a description. The CFDA number is only a federal thing, so you'll never have this on the state. This is where the state other and the federal others differ. But a CFDA number needs to be in the correct format. And for federal funds, it's number, point number. Sometimes people will put, I'm not even going to go into this. You guys use smart forms. You cannot create this error on a smart form. It's only those agencies that do not and the states that use it. So just if any of these resources, so I wanted to kind of highlight, you see on the screen, C6H, if any of these resources were also reported, and this particular one is under private, it gives you 3N, 4P, and I'm sorry, I can't see the other one because it's my screen there, 5E. That one is telling you add those all together. Those are the children. You add those all together, and so this is one where this particular 6H cannot exceed that total. So if you're looking at the local, if any of these resources, then you'll only see 3N and 4P. You add those together, and that's what's telling you it cannot be greater than that. It also cannot be greater than, if you, in this particular example on the screen, 6G, if your number here is 10, and you say if any of these resources are also reported under, this is on the federal. So let's just say that this is under the federal, and it says that you are reporting 10 federal resources. And then on the state, you report there are 15 dollars of its could be reported on the others. Well, you're already saying it's only looking at, on the state one, it's only looking at 3N. So in this particular case, you cannot say that we had more resources that are kind of possibly duplicated than where that information is coming from. So if you have 10 federal dollars, but you're saying under state that we have 15 additional dollars, it's going back to that federal number. So it's going to say that you cannot have 15 because 15 is greater than 10. So this one's a little bit more complicated. We don't see this a lot, so that's good. And also one of the things that kind of to do with this, oh, sorry, give me a second. Okay, I was on the wrong, I moved my little screen and just going down on my PowerPoint. Another thing to important, especially for the fiscal people, when you're looking at resources, the point of origin is important. Where is that money coming from? Because sometimes the resources can get to you indirectly. So CSBG is an example. We all know it's a federal resource, but if you only looked at where it came from to your organization, it's coming from the state, but it's not state resources, it's a pass-through. So that's always federal. CDBG funds are often a pass-through unless you're an entitlement community, because you do not get those funds directly from the feds. You usually get them from a unit of government. So you may consider that as a local resource, but it really isn't, because the money, they're just passing the funds through to you from the feds. Another important thing between the, from fiscal person to fiscal person, that they may they're just kind of going, oh, we got it from the city, so I'm going to put it under the city. So where it comes from is important. And usually when you get federal funds, your agreement with the local unit of government or the state will actually reference the CFDA number on it. If there's a CFDA number, then it's federal funds coming to you. Okay, so service cross comparison. So LEAP and or DOE weatherization. So there's two LEAPs, right? There's fuel assistance and there's weatherization. We're only looking at weatherization here. Head Start and early Head Start, that's what we're looking at on the federal level. And I've got a couple more slides after this that'll make a little bit more sense. But also I have question mark, because this is where you guys can internally kind of fill in the blanks. If you have a housing program, you receive emergency shelter grant funds. Well, where would you expect those funds to be reported? Well, you would expect them, of course, under under resources, section C. But what services would you expect that funding source to be reported on? What outcomes would you expect? That's called data mapping. And Alana talked about that, where, you know, you kind of just follow the logic of the funds. So kind of looking internally, we're not looking at housing, we're not looking at assets, well, actually that's TANF, we're not looking at the Child Care Development Block Grant on the federal level, we're looking just at LIHEAP and or DOE weatherization. Or Head Start and Early Head Start. Those are the 4 sources we're looking at on the federal level, but you can do the same logic on the local level, and you can say, does our data make sense to us? Are we reporting robustly? Because that's important. The CSBG annual report is not just about what you do with the CSBG funds, but it's what you're doing holistically. How are you bringing the different programs together? Because one of the things about CSBG is it's a linkage, it's program. It's often not a program in and of itself, but it's kind of the foundation that helps bring in those other programs. So that's important kind of to think about what else you can be kind of data mapping across in your agency. So deeper dive, this is just an example. Now again, notice the arrows. This does go back and forth. If you report funds and under Head Start, under the under module 2 section C, then we would expect to see, so let's say if you report Head Start funds, which is C3B3, we would expect logically that you would have service B2 completed, Head Start. If you have something in B4, 3B4, which is early Head Start, then we would expect something in 2A. If you have something in 2A, then we would expect to see something in 3B4. So this goes both ways. So you, depending on the particular error message or the warning message you may get, because this is incongruent. So this is a warning. It'll tell you, it just depends on where you have data, where you don't have data. Same way with weatherization. So do we have any module 2 questions?
We did have one in the chat there.
Okay, I'm sorry, so I'm out of my home and I'm looking at just a little small laptop screen. So if I missed anything, what would you, okay, did you say allocated is what you've spent, not the total amount allocated? No, allocated, and if I misquoted and misstated this, I apologize. Allocated is what you have available to spend. Now, some of it may have already been spent. Some of it may still be on the books for you to spend. So think about allocated as what you received in total. So if you had a grant for $50,000, that is what you have available to spend. So it's allocated to you. Whereas expenditures of what of that 50,000 have you actually, used to date? Does that help?
Yes. So just to clarify, like C2 is the total amount the agency has received, AKA the allocation.
Quick clarification on that too, Ben. This is Jen. Is that including any carryover, or that is don't include carryover because that was technically reported on the prior year? You only want to say, like for this 24, don't include your 23 carryover. It would just be what is allocated for the 24 funds, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure.
And that is why expenditures are not always going to be less than, and that's the reason why we don't call that out as a data validation, because that, if you have carryovers, if you have a discretionary grant from CSBG, it's asking under A to put all of the CSBG resources you have that you've expended. So it may include all of those. Whereas you're allocated, it's because you don't want to double report it. So that in particular case, the allocation would be smaller. So but does that make sense to you? If you don't have any discretionary dollars and you do not have any carryover, is your allocation going to be less than what you expended? Most likely not.
Just a follow-up question on the example of the $50,000. So you got a grant, not CSBG, you get another type of grant for $50,000. If you put that you received a $50,000 grant this year, but you don't spend all of it, so let's say you spend half of it. Now next year I have $25,000 available to spend. Am I reporting it again next year, the other half?
Have a question?
Because it says allocated, it doesn't say expended. So technically that would have been allocated the year before. It's just some of the allocations allow you to do them over multiple years. Another way to do it, because here's the problem, there's no perfect alignment between the different funding sources you receive. Fiscal, they have a wonderful time trying to reconcile the different reporting periods that they have to, they have their agency fiscal year, they have the federal fiscal year, they have their whenever they have to do their 990 could be a different reporting period. So there's so many different reporting periods that they have to look at. Sometimes it's what is reasonable. So if your reporting period for CSBG, so my state, when I was at an agency, we used October to September for a reporting period. Well, Head Start, for the most part, started for us in August. That's when our school system starts. So they're using an August to, July reporting period for Head Start. It aligns almost perfectly. Then it's like just report what you receive for your federal Head Start allocation for that, whatever that equivalent fiscal year is. So that made sense. There is no right or wrong answer other than making sure you're consistently reporting it and you're not duplicating from year to year.
And making sure that the agency as a whole understands what is happening. That, for that 50,000.
I'm sorry?
Never mind, I'm just clarifying from my own thought.
Okay.
Just that like the agency as a whole needs to understand just the reporting thought behind that. Just for consistency basis.
And that's where consistency really comes into play. Desktop operations, desktop manual, SOPs, it's really kind of important for these kinds of things because it really is just how the lens that you look at it, and one person may look at it one way and one person may look at it a different way, and neither way is right or wrong. It's just, especially if you can justify it. I would just give a quick example. Internally, we track our time like we have to, we have federal funds, so we track where we're spending our time. And we were working on this project. 3 of us were working on a project. 3 of us put it into 3 different specific PAR categories, and we could each 3 make a justification of why we chose the one we did because it made sense to us. Well, if we want to internally track how much time really was spent for this, and this, we're invalidating that analysis with that particular line item because we're tracking it all differently. So we're apples to oranges. So we're in this fruit category, but we're not in the same. We're not apples to apples. So having those conversations internally helped us figure out where we as an agency should have put it. Because that was important to us to have an accurate record of our time. So none of us were wrong. We were all right. We just were maybe not at the best answer. And I have to say, my answer was the one that won out. So no, I'm just joking. But it's just, there's just different ways of looking at things sometimes, and having those conversations internally, as well as having those conversations as a state, because there are some agencies are doing something so very different. And there's some agencies that you guys are doing very similar things. And in order to kind of create a statewide numbers that Ben and everybody can use, you need to make sure they're apples to apples when possible, because it's just really important for data consistency and data quality and data integrity, reliability, all of those other data words that you want to say. But having those internal conversations first, having those external conversations on the state level is also equally important. Okay. Anything else?
Somebody has a question.
And I like how Elena put it that yes, the annual report really shows the services your agency is providing, the outcomes that are achieved by participants with all funds. That's where I talked about robustness. That is what the CSBG annual report is about. Only Section A under Module 2 is CSBG specific. That's the only thing. The rest of the other sections are looking holistically at what your agency has done with all of its resources.
One question, just on module 2A4, you had pointed out that the other that has the asterisk is not just for comments on like for clarification, but more comments towards what the actual funding is.
Yeah.
Oh, correctly?
Here, this one right here. This section right down here, the below, please specify.
Correct.
Yes, that is not for general comments. That is if your organization used CSBG dollars towards agency capacity building, that is indicated by a number greater than 0 in A2I. And in A4, when you're saying, how did we spend that dollars? Let's say it's $100. Then you're saying in A4, how did we use those $100? You look at there's 4 defined categories: community needs assessment, strategic planning, data management, reporting, training, and attendance. If one of those best or multiple of those, you select all that apply. Well, let's say you've done something completely different. Then you select other, and then you have to use the below, please specify. That's when you would use that section.
Makes sense.
Now, I'll tell you, this is one thing I'll never call out on a federal review if I see other, because you can tell the difference between general comments and, because they really go into a lot of detail. Hey, we had a lot of changes from this year to last year, and this is why. That, that the agency's providing data, trying to put comments to justify their differences, but that's not where those comments go. Those have to go on the comments template. Okay. Let me get back to where we were here. Okay. So now we're looking at module 4. That's the individual and family level. So I'm reversing the order a little bit because section B is services, and I know we always want to start with the outcome, but I'm doing it this way just to talk about the dependency, that in order to achieve an outcome, most likely you have done something to help that customer. So what the output or the service is what was done directly to help that customer. You provided employment services, you provided Head Start services, there's some very specific examples, of course. And the so what of that is the MPIs. So I just wanted us to kind of see that logic when you're data mapping. And you can do it the reverse way too. You can start with your outcome, what you are going to be accomplishing, and then what specific services you're going to provide. That also works. But for this particular, because I was talking about dependent data points, I wanted us to see it this way. So unduplicated accounts, but there are a few exceptions. That's very important. And if you don't read your instruction manuals under Module 4, you will not know when the exceptions are possible. A common one is food. If you distribution of food boxes, this is the number of referrals under domain 7, the number of hygiene kits that have been distributed under 5, which is the health domain. So there are exceptions. So it's very important that you guys know what are exceptions and when it's allowed. Because if you do, let's say you report under service 4S, it's not an exception, it's an unduplicated account. Now we're going to be looking at your service number and going, wait, you're only reporting 100 people, but you're reporting 500 people under your service. It doesn't make sense. They're incongruent. So that's kind of important to, know the exceptions, because those are not going to be called out, and you do not need to waste your time validating, on your comments memo, those Only focus on the ones that are requiring a true unduplicated count. Now, I'm saying this now, as of now. We are going to eventually be moving over to a report version 3. These, what we're talking about now may change, but we're not there yet. So I'm talking in the here and now. I'm talking about 2.1. And that was approved by OMB. So that will be the report that agencies are going to start reporting on. 2.1 is basically 2.0, especially on the content is all the same. So don't let 2.0 and 2.1 confuse you. Individuals, not households. So it's important that it's all about individuals served. And so you have to identify who the customer was, who the client that you work directly with. So you can say indirectly by helping the mother or father, the parent, get a job has indirectly benefited the children. Yes, that has. But in terms of looking at the service of employment, we're only going to be focused on get that individual that we help get the job, right? Category 4, the domain 4, which is housing, is wonky because, and you don't get this if you look at just the report, you only get this wonkiness when you read the instructions. So under the services, the housing services, you can get the unduplicated number of individuals served can be everybody in the household. So if you have a household size of 5, then you can report 5 that under 4S. 5 under, provided, housing services, if like housing placement. If you have a household size of 1, then you're only going to be reporting 1. So you may have 2 households that you're serving, 1 person and 5 people. Your number under 4S could be legitimately 6. So that's important, that the housing domain is the only one that is wonky like this, that you can count everybody in the household as being benefited. But that's not to say, do not report 1 household. Like I said, you have to make that household number into the individual number in that household, all of the members. And some people still think, oh, I'm only reporting 1 household. No, you can legitimately report everybody in the household and get a larger number there. Cross comparisons, this is very important. There is comparisons between expenditures, as Alana gave the example, resources, FNPIs, and client characteristics. We're going to go just a little bit more deeper dive into these. We talked about this earlier. Well, this is the outcomes and services. So if you have an outcome, you would expect there to be a service number. The reason why this arrow only goes one way is you could have a service, but not have a reportable outcome. I'm not saying that there is no outcome, but if you're providing a food box, there may not be a reportable outcome because of the nature of the service, the emergency of it. So in that particular case, you may have a service, but you may not have a related outcome. But if you have an outcome, there's most likely you're going to have a service. There's exceptions, but you kind of expect that kind of, if you provide a service, there is going to probably be an outcome, but not always. But if you have an outcome, there should be some service that led to that outcome. That's kind of that logic there. We talked about this one earlier, not going to go more into that. This is the employment example, and the service or the CSBG expenditures example. So we don't want to go more into that, but I just note that there are cross comparisons. FNPIs, so we're reversing. One important thing with the FNPIs, there are 3 columns that you should be completing. But I say should with a little bit of an exception. Targets. If you have provided services in a program and it's an existing program, you're probably going to have a target based off of historical data and knowns of expected of what's coming up. And sometimes our targets sometimes can kind kind of thrown out of anything because COVID, I always like to say because of COVID, it really kind of messed up everybody's targets because we no longer could rely on the historical data to show us what was going to happen currently and vice versa. We had a period of time when we had COVID, and so we may not have been as working so much on employment. We were doing more focus on emergency supports because people, were losing their jobs or, and that kind of stuff. So we were focused more on emergency supports. So now we're back in the post-COVID. So now trying to use your targets from previous during the COVID time may appear a little bit, it poses a little challenge because now you're probably going to be working more with people. So that's the reason why you can't just look at historical data. You also have to look at known or expected variables, but you can't always account for all the variables, which is why nationally we do not look at the percentage columns, but it's important to look at those on the internal and on the state level because it's showing how well you're predicting. And if you're not predicting that, within that plus or minus 20%, then maybe you need some additional TNTA on how to appropriately establish a target because targets are helping the agency identify, is it doing what it set out to do? And then the percentage achieving, well, if you have a program that you have 1% achieve and you served 100, that looks kind of like, okay, why only one person? Then that kind of leads to that analysis data is why did only one achieve? Well, maybe the 59 of them are still in the still achieving, which we don't report, that are going to be reported in the next year because, unfortunately, customers do not go through a program in the same reporting period. So they may start in one reporting period and then finish in the next reporting period. And so that may be what I call the still achieving. And then there's also an accepted of where there's going to be dropout for whatever reason. So you're not going to expect 100% of people coming in are actually going to achieve for most FNPIs. And so there is a little bit of acceptance there. But if you go from one, if you're helping 100 but only one achieved, that would be a red or an orange flag, yellow flag, because it just tells you need to look more deeper at why that is. And that also kind of helps you, is this program actually, are we offering the program as it should? It may be something that we identify that we have to fix internally. And when I say fix, it doesn't necessarily mean you've done anything wrong. It's just sometimes we don't have all of the information until we start something, and we change as we grow and as we learn. And so sometimes we just have to, and that's a part of the whole ROMA cycle, or just a performance management cycle, where you're looking at it in the circle, and because the data from the evaluation phase feeds back into the assessment and planning. So it's just important that that's just a part of that entire thing. But there's 3 columns, right? That's what I've tried to get back to is, so if you have something in 1, logically you would expect something in 2, because if you're serving people, you expect the target. But this is where that exception comes in. Sometimes, especially in case management programs, or just something that's just really kind of minor, maybe even in like the case management component of Head Start, 99% of the individuals they're serving may kind of request the same services. You may provide the budgeting skills for everybody. Easy to target because you know roughly how many people come through your case management program that can be served in a particular, reporting period. But you have 1 or 2 families that request education assistance. Maybe they want to, their goal is to do higher education. Well, you're not going to set a target most likely for that because it's an anomaly. You want to still get credit for helping that customer achieve? Yes, but you may not set a target. So having a 0 target isn't a bad thing always, but it again is a point to stop and go, hey, why do we have a 0 target? Because we are helping people. Same way with actual results. If you have number of individuals served, I've often seen, unfortunately, that there are lots of zeros or blanks in the actual results. So you're telling me you've served all of these people, but nobody has achieved during that entire reporting period. So it's wonky. So this is why it's incongruent. It's not an error. until you, which is a warning on the national level, but it may be an error on your level. You may go, gosh, we have our database not mapped correctly. So we have our data is only being populated in one column, but we don't have anybody being mapped into the actual result. In that particular case, it's an error for you guys, but not necessarily an error on the national level. So that's kind of important to know. There's 3 columns. Number served, parent, number achieved, child. So the number of people, so this is kind of one of the wonky ones when I was telling you, like with the allocated, you kind of look at during a particular year. The indicators stand alone. You may have a customer who comes in at the end of one fiscal year or programmatic period and hasn't achieved. So you're going to see their number 1 in number of individuals served, but you won't see them in actual results because they haven't achieved. They're still in the still achieving column. Well, you're still helping them next year. So now they go back into the number of individuals served because you're still serving them. And now you still still report them under individuals served because you're still working with them during the next fiscal year or the next program year, and now you have a result for them in that. So it's very important to understand how to report customers that are going across multiple years, so what I see, like I said, a lot of times is the actual results column is larger than the number 1 column because of those changes where, like I said, one person is still kind of in process between 2 fiscal years, but they're reported in both under number of individuals served. Service cross comparison, we talked about that. Z indicators, remember that additional requirement, you have to write the description. The number of individuals who, and you add the so what, you've got to remember to add the so what, and remember to just make it outcome language. So we got a couple special indicators under that have that parent-child indicators. I'm not focused on the ones that use the summation because you guys use smart sheets. You will not be able to your sum has to be equal to the children. The parent has to be equal to the sum of the children. 1H and 6A are different. These are dependent. Data point cannot be larger than. So 6A and 1H are the parents. So it's an unduplicated number of individuals that worked in that who achieved, that were a part of your career advancement related program, who increase something. Maybe it was increased income, maybe it was increased benefits. It doesn't matter at this point in time. 1H is an unduplicated number of individuals that participated in your career advancement related program. And of those, how many of those individuals increase their income through a salary or wage increase? How many of those individuals increase their hours? Maybe they got more money because now they're working more hours. And of those, how many increase their benefits? So let's say customer A comes in and it's part of your employment advancement program. And this individual, because of your assistance, you help them get to a better job, a higher position. Maybe they got promoted. And that position has more money to it, right? So now they're under 1H1 because they've got a better salary. So their income has increased because of a wage or salary increase. Let's say because that new position went from 25 hours to 40 hours, now they've increased the number of hours worked. So not only are they getting paid more, but they're also getting paid for more hours. So now they've also increased their hours. And let's say that promotion also, because it went from 25 to 40, now they're eligible for benefits. Now they have health insurance. And that one person is going to be reported once under 1H. But that one person is also going to be reported under 1H1, 1H2, 1H3. But that's not always the case. Sometimes people will only be reported in 1. Other times people may be reported in 2, and sometimes the person will be reported in all 3. It just depends on that particular person and their situation. Same logic with 6A. and its children indicators. These ones are often difficult. I see the most errors across the nation with these. And so it's remember when I said it's not an equal to, it's not a summation issue, it's a cannot exceed. So 1H1 has to be equal to or less than 1H. 1H2 has to be equal to or less than 1H. 1H3 has to be equal to or less than 1H. So that's it. So there's also some demographic connections. So under 2A, 2B, 2C, specifically the one that I have here is the 2C1 and the 2D1. You see that children 0 to 5, children 0 to 5, children 0 to 5, that is going to go back to the number of children you reported under your demographic report that fits that category. There's one about seniors, it's another age dependency, and then you've got your disabilities, and those are individuals that relates to the number of individuals on your demographics that said, yes, they have a disability. So in this particular case, it's still kind of a dependency logic that the number of people that you report under age, if you say you've served 250 kids, 0 to 5 under 2A, you would expect your 0 to 5 number under your demographics to be equal to or larger. Most likely it's going to be larger, but it has to be at least equal to. Same way with disabilities. You're looking at the number of people reported with disabilities and the number of people in F5G. So you may get one of those kind of, if they're different. If your indicator number is larger than your demographic number, then it's going to be called out as a warning because it's incongruent. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, it's just incongruent. So now we're looking at the client characteristics. So we got, you've got your individuals, you've got your households. The two most important parts that you want to kind of note here is the unduplicated number of individuals and the number of unduplicated households. Now these are shaded, but they're really not. They actually do allow data. So this is the anomaly to that shaded rule. But everything else you see on here that's shaded is an auto calculation. And so that's telling you that 1E is the sum of A through D. So unduplicated number served. So I've talked about A and B. Then we have most, but not all, aggregate to equal item A or B. So this is a very common validation issue that we get across the nation. What we're looking at is what you report under A, let's say you say 5, but under C1E, that number is 4. Well, item A and C1E should equal each other because of that unknown not reported. So it's important that agencies use that unknown not reported appropriately to get your numbers, because we don't have demographics on everybody. We may have at least one demographic on that customer, but we may not have a full set of demographics. So we do have a lot of people that are going to be unknown and not reported, especially in other programs that have a whole set of different demographics that they're reporting on. So it's important to make sure that you know how to use the unknown not reported and your data system is set to capture and report accurately that unknown not reported. Because that's what we're saying is C1E must equal item A. In this particular, so D9J should equal B, because that's the household number. So that's how they kind of work together. So always kind of keep in mind what your total unduplicated number of individuals is and make sure that your individual characteristics match that. Another thing I'm going to talk about is item E. Item E is exceptionally important because A and B require an unduplicated number of individuals. You may not be able to capture an unduplicated number on or be able to say it's unduplicated on other programs because not everybody has their data systems were a single system. Not all systems are interoperable. So your Head Start may not be actually adding to your demographic numbers under like C1 or C2 or, D9, because they're not able to, because you're not able to say that that Head Start family didn't also receive weatherization services. In that particular case, that's when you use E. And this is the program name. So you would put like Head Start and the number of individuals, and I just choose the number 250. You have 250 kids that are participating in your Head Start. Now, when I tell you that I'm looking at services and connecting it that has an age requirement and connecting it to looking at the demographics, I see that you have 250 kids reported under, that particular Head Start service or the Head Start FNPI, and I see 250 here. I know by looking at your data, you're telling me we have 200. I'm sorry? So you're telling me that you have that number of kids in your Head Start. So I'm looking at that number. I'm not looking at your 2A, your C2A, because you're telling me that those Head Start kids are not under 2A. So it's important to know how to use item E and use it when you possibly can, because it will help minimize some of those other cross section warnings. So services and FNPIs. So a deeper dive really quick. Trait total and item A and B. We kind of talked about that. And so there's a couple examples where the trait total should equal item A if it's an individual one, should equal item B if it's a household one. There's a couple of exceptions, and this is now looking at D9A and D10A. Usually they're both saying single person. One is a single person household and one's a single person household size. We would expect those to be the same. This one I know is a little bit more tricky. I will be very open with that because I know different programs use different definitions of household and family. So it's important to try to get these as similar as possible. And so if you can, great. If you cannot, that one maybe just require a justification of, I'm sorry, this is the best we can do. This is, because of difference between programs or something. So it may be an error just because they, in theory, should be equaling each other, but they don't always. So I wanted to call that one out. There's a couple ones that are so under your demographics, you have two types of validations. Most of them are going to be the summation. There are going to be some that are not summation, but are dependent, cannot be larger than. So this is a particular example of 5B. So this is health insurance, and anybody who says yes, let's say 5 people, and those 5 people, what types of health insurance did they have? Well, there are some customers that may have multiple sources. My brother has 2. He has Medicaid and Medicare. So in yes, I would put 1, and in Medicaid, I would put 1, and Medicare, I would put 1. So because C1 through CA, 8 are dependents, they don't get added together because a person may be in multiple. It just means that C1 cannot exceed yes. C2 cannot exceed yes. C3 cannot exceed yes. But the aggregated total of C1 through CA should probably never equal yes, because there are people that do have multiple sources. This is another example of that over on the household size or the household side, that 13 is the unduplicated number of customers or households. They're going to be in 1. And they're going to be in the best fit. So again, my brother's example, he has multiple funding sources, but they're all fit under the other source. And he also receives non-cash benefits. So in his particular case, based off his situation, I would put him under F because that is what best describes his situation. Now, when I come to 14A, because I said other. So other sources, he gets SSI, SSDI, and he gets retirement income from Social Security. So my brother would be one under F, under 13F, but would also, I would put him under 3 different places under 14. So again, not equal, not a summation, but a cannot exceed. So 14's individual data points cannot exceed. Now, the reason why these are sums though, because let's say other income sources, you have to add up 13B, because it says other income sources, 13C, which says other income sources, and E, which says other income sources, and F, which is other income sources. So you have to look at all different ones that have other and add those together, and that becomes your parent number. That 14 individual points cannot be more than. This is an example of where this actually fits the summation, but you have to create your own total. Health does not give you your total. So yes, no, and unknown get added together, and that becomes your total. So just want to let you know that you kind of have to do that. Another example of a difference is disconnected youth. This one is the only dependency on this is it cannot exceed the number of people you reported under 14 to 24, but there is no unduplicated number for this one. It is the one that is a lot different, and we've already talked about them. So there are 4 exceptions to the summation validation. These are using that dependent data point larger validation. And so non-cash benefits is another one that we didn't go through, but for my brother, I would put him under A because he has SNAP, and he also has public housing, so I would put him under that. But in terms of under 13, that's the reason why I said other income sources and non-cash benefits. Deeper dive demographic total again, 14. We're looking at those 2 together. Pay attention to what the FNPI considers youth. This is where, when I was telling you about the data valid culture, you need to make sure that the people who are tracking know what they are tracking, because this one is 17 to 14, but the employment FNPI that talks about youth is actually 14 to 24. So it's important to make sure not only the people that are tracking the data, but that your system, you have to map your systems behind the scene usually to create a report. Make sure that the people that are mapping your system knows to and uses that demographic to make sure that they're actually capturing the right people under that particular data point. Just another example, we talked about the Head Start one here. And here's an example where I was talking about with the individuals who may not be in the above. And I'm looking at E, not F, because this is individuals, and all of the demographics, all of the FNPIs and all of the services, it's an unduplicated individual count. So I'm not paying attention to what's under F because that's household count, but I'm looking at here. So just a quick example, you may get a validation error or you may not, it just depends. So no validation issue is the agency's, reporting 225 or 250 Head Start individuals under the CEA, and 250 individuals are listed under the Head Start related services and outcomes, but we only see 50 under 2C, C2A, which is the demographic of 0 to 5. This is no validation issue because you've already told me under CEA that you have 250 kids that you're not including under 2A. But a validation issue is if you do not put the Head Start number down there under EA, and you do report 250 under your Head Start related outcomes and services, because we only have that 50 to compare it to, then it's going to be called out as a warning because it's incongruent. So I hope that kind of helps help you guys understand why the E item under your demographics is important, because it can help the person who's reviewing your data to better understand. So any module 4 questions? And I don't know where you guys are, so hold on. People, okay.
Tiffany, I also wanted to give a little note. I look back everything to the review memo because that's where my like, not expertise, but where the things that I do kind of happen. Speaking of the target, I did put a very lengthy message in the chat, but just to reiterate what Tiffany said, that it is very possible to have a 0 for a target, and COVID is a great example, right? Like, who knew? And hopefully it's never going to happen again. But emergencies like that on a smaller scale happen all the time. Or I always think of it, it's a good sign to me that, it's not an emergency. It's, we didn't expect that that outcome was achieved, but actually individuals did achieve that outcome. So I think that is only a good thing. But when it comes to review memo, a good practice is to explicitly confirm that you have a 0, you're aware of that, and just provide an explanation, right? And a lot of it comes from, oh, we didn't expect that, or, next year we will be redoing our needs assessment and we'll see if that pops up, right? So mapping is done, you don't redo mapping every year, or you don't redo targets. It's not, it is a complex thing to do. So sometimes, yes, you didn't expect that, which is 100% okay. But the practice to avoid, I did not see it in Region 8 or in any of the regions that I reviewed, but I did hear from colleagues that how do you solve the problem, right? One thing, you can comment on it, admit it, and move on. But another part that you can do, it is a possibility, but it is practice to avoid. You can just delete an outcome, right? If outcome doesn't exist, then there is no warning, right? We don't have column 1, we don't have column 2, column 3, so there is no warning. But if that happens, and that happens sometimes, again, I did not see it in this group, didn't see it anywhere in Region 8 and anywhere in my portfolio. But when that happens, what we are losing on participants who were working towards an outcome, and we're losing the participants who achieved an outcome. And I know that Tiffany started with that on a, North Dakota is a small state. When you scale it down to the agency, it might be only 2-3 people, and it might seem like insignificant, but that adds up really to the annual report. And then I just would hate for you to lose that important piece of information. So again, when you get a warning or the target is 0 or something is 0, it's nothing to be scared of. It's more so, hey, give it a second look, and if it's indeed 0, just leave it and confirm and comment. So please do not delete anything. Again, we do not want to lose that important piece of information for our reporting purposes, for your reporting purposes and records. Sorry, just wanted to throw it out there just to make sure that it was a very long message, and I started reading it and I was like, oh, should have just made it the comment. Thank you so much. Sorry.
It's very true. I mean, it really is important because this is your information. It's what you guys have done, and you want to get credit for what you've done. It's important. Also, you may over trends. Trend analysis is very important. You may see, like if you're looking at demographics, and every year your senior or your elderly number keeps increasing, that's telling you something. And you look, does your community needs assessment tell you that your elderly population is also increasing? If not, then why is your agency's number of people served? Maybe you're doing better marketing. Maybe you realize that was a demographic you hadn't served previously, and you're missing out on helping some important individuals there. Or for targets, you may have a service that very few people, or an outcome that very few people have traditionally worked on, but now you're starting to see it more common. So the trend analysis kind of helps you identify what maybe future trends are going to be, so you can help kind of figure out, should I start setting a target? Should I start allocating resources to that particular, service? What can we do to make sure that people know that we have that service? So it's really important to use your data, because it's never wrong unless it's an error. But a warning is just saying, hey, take a second look, and so that second look could help you in the future as well. So quickly, let's just finish up, and Module 3, just quickly, why it's important. We cannot solve poverty by just working with individuals. There are systems in place that do not help people actually get out of poverty. We talk often about the pond analogy, the fishing analogy. You can teach a person to fish, Or you give a person a fish, great, you help feed that person for a day. You teach that person to fish, great, you've helped them for a lifetime. Maybe not. Because if that pond that they're fishing in doesn't have adequate fish, or fish that actually can be eaten, because there's some of those fish, or maybe that pond has a barrier, a dam that's preventing the fish from getting down to the section where people are fishing. The community initiatives are that kind of level of trying to make sure everybody has equal access, equity. And so if, employment, you identify employment as a problem, people are unemployed in your area, you have to do that deeper dive analysis of why. Is it because people don't have adequate skills to obtain the jobs that are available? That's one strategy. Is it that there are not enough jobs in your community? That's a different strategy. And so it's very important that the community level, and it's often multiple. We often have to tackle issues on multiple things. So I just want to tell you that why it's important. So if you're not working on the community level initiative, consider thinking about, are you guys doing things that are actually helping the community with lasting improvements? So we're looking at counts of change and rates of change, and that's a whole different training to go more in detail to, but I just want to say why it's important. Tools and resources, we've already talked about the comments template, the annual report instructions, the annual report lexicon, smart forms, vendor documents, not applicable to you guys because you guys use the smart forms, but if you guys ever change, then this would be upcoming national webinars that will be released very soon, or the announcement about that, and individualized TNTA. That can be provided in multiple different ways. So it's important just to reach out. And then final questions, and there's my contact information. So anything
Awesome.
I didn't touch on?
That was awesome, Tiffany. Do we have any questions from you?
Now, I'll say this, sometimes there's a lot to digest. And you may, as you start doing your report and you have a specific question, it's kind of like, where do I put this funding source? I don't quite know where to put it. Or I don't know, should I track it here or whatever. As you're starting to get into, just when you are starting to do your FY24 report, if the questions come up, then reach out.